Hi, I'm Dr. Stan Steindl. Welcome back to Compassion in a T-shirt, where we discuss all things compassion with leading researchers and practitioners from many different perspectives and from all around the world. Today, I'm honoured to introduce my guest, Shannon McNeair, a trailblazing psychologist and proud Aboriginal woman whose work is deeply rooted in cultural understanding and healing. Australia's First Nations people hold a vital place in the heart of this land, with wisdom and resilience that stretch back tens of thousands of years. Yet the challenges they face today are deeply tied to history, trauma, and systems in need of change. That's why this conversation is so important to me. Shannon brings a unique perspective, combining her professional expertise with personal experience to create transformative change in the lives of the Aboriginal families and communities that she works with. In today's episode, we'll talk about her journey into psychology, the incredible work she's doing through her practice, and what compassion means in the context of reconciliation and healing. I hope you take as much from this deeply enriching discussion as I did. And so I bring you Shannon McNeair. All right. Well, we might get started. Shannon McNeair, welcome to Compassion in a T-shirt.
Thanks, Dr. Sam. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah, you've achieved so much really as a psychologist. Just before we started recording, you were mentioning all the various things that you even have done already this morning, but kind of in your work, and especially as an advocate, I guess, for Aboriginal well-being and so on. Could you tell us a little bit, first of all, just your personal professional journey there, or sort of how
Yeah,
you were inspired into onto this path?
yeah, absolutely. Look, my first career might come as a shock to people. I was actually a police officer.
Ah,
So,
right.
yeah. So I finished high school and police academy, and off I went. And I guess my journey as a female in policing was an eye opener. And it was also an opener for a few other reasons because I guess in policing you see people experiencing, you're interacting and touch points with them are all about probably the worst times in their life. So they come into contact with police. So I found myself kind of wondering, what else can I do here? Because there was an end point where, people will become incarcerated, and I kind of felt um, there was more that I wanted to do. But really, I stayed in policing until I was 24, or I left
Hmm.
when I was 25 because my oldest son was born, Benjamin, and I wanted a career that kind of offered a long term pathway for me. And I just kind of felt at the time that policing was kind of way too. There was a lot of risk involved in policing, and I was a single mum, and I thought, I could probably need to do something a little bit safer. And I found myself reading child development books when Ben was born, my son, and my mum was the one who encouraged me to, while you're on maternity leave, you may as well just go and enrol and do some studies in that area. So I did, and I did the first Bachelor of Arts in Psychology in Geraldton at the little annex up at the back of TAFE, which was Edith Cowan University, and I did that through a distance ed learning with some Aboriginal support staff who to this day still remember my journey as the only Aboriginal student studying psychology in Geraldton.
Ah,
Yeah, yeah,
right. Yeah. Okay. I mean, you were sort of very aware, even in policing, that you were working at the coalface of suffering, really, wasn't it? You could sort of
yeah,
painfully aware, really, that people were having some of the worst times of their life. And I guess in
yeah,
policing, there perhaps is a compassionate element to it. I mean, there's various elements, and obviously. Um, it's well that's one of the things that must be so hard to juggle in a role like that is you can feel and sense the suffering, and yet you're
yeah,
required to respond in certain ways. You wanted
yeah,
to keep that kind of keep trying to be helpful, I suppose. You wanted to find a way to still help people.
yeah.
psychology became the thing. So how did things go from there? You got into, I mean, yes, your mum was like, oh, why don't you also study, while having a baby?
Yeah,
But you did
yeah.
that. I mean, how did things progress from there?
Well, I just kind of kept following that pathway, and I worked part-time at the TAFE as well, and I just kept finishing, and I completed that bachelor degree in 2009, but I'd had another baby. I had Lachlan, my youngest son. But to actually go and qualify for registration back then as a psychologist, I had to do some postgraduate studies.
Mm,
So I actually had to leave my hometown of Geraldton and my safety
mm,
net and my parents who supported me with everything, being a single mum. And off I went then to Perth.
mm,
So that was really hard. I missed out on a lot of family events. I had to work full time, study full time, look after two little boys, and it was a huge juggling act, but I got that done as well. So I did a postgraduate diploma in psychology.
mm,
And then I kind of found my way working full time in the health department in a really intensive program, which is called multisystemic therapy. And that was really home visiting families and trying to support families in their environment to manage these complex behaviours that kids were demonstrating, with the outcome, the goal being really to reduce the rate of recidivism for Aboriginal young people. So trying to catch what's going on really early, so that it doesn't become this effect that continues to just be incarceration, which leads to nothing but more incarceration.
mm. That's gone on to really be your professional passion, I think, is sort of helping families and individuals and families and communities to navigate that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about that in a sec, but I suppose
Mm,
I'm just really aware that there were challenges there to even sort of go on that study path. I
yeah.
was surprised to hear that. I mean, it's great that Edith Cowan has a campus in Geraldton. I mean, that was great. But then kind of going to Perth and so on. I mean, how do we help facilitate some of that, do you think, in terms of helping those, sort of have this, find the
Mm,
study that they
mm,
need and get access to
yep.
it and that sort of thing?
Yep. Look, I think if I think about my situation back then, there's a really lovely lady, and she's always been invested in Aboriginal students. And because she was my Aboriginal um, education support worker in primary school, but she was instrumental to knowing what my situation was. I was a single mum. So I
Mm,
think at the core, the support services that are around Aboriginal students is really important. But I always understood from my own situation of what I needed, and I was a mum. So in fact, the reality that I was a mum was the thing that kept me going. It motivated me because I needed to support two little boys. So rather than the thing that got in the way, I used it as a motivation.
mm,
But I was truly very, very well supported by her, and her name is Ronnie Forrest, and I know she won't mind me saying so, but she still looks at me and my progression and my career and goes, you know,
mm,
I absolutely understand where you're going to. But she knew my story, and she knew my family, and she knew my situation, and she did everything she could, nothing short of pushing the pram with the baby while I was studying and getting tutoring and all of those things. So I think
mm,
for me now, leaning back in and supporting other Aboriginal students and psychologists, that's my brief as well. That's where I've come from, and that's why my commitment is as well, to support others, because I've been on that journey, and it was really hard back then.
mm,
Um,
mm.
it wasn't easy, so
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, there's a kind of a just there was certainly an intrinsic motivation. I mean, you were obviously driven to get there and I really, yeah, that's you sort of reframed what might look a bit like a barrier into an actual a purpose that
yeah,
really helped with motivation. But it was key people around you as well
yeah,
that believed in you and were there to support you and you've really kind of see that as a role that you can take now. And well, I mean, firstly, just your story is something, you're a trailblazer a bit, and it's an inspiration really to others
yeah,
to follow in those footsteps. But it sounds like you really take practical steps to support people as well.
yeah, absolutely.
So what's your work now then? Like, what are the main things that you're focusing on?
Mm. Well, look, I guess to fill some of the gaps about where I've come from to now running my own company, I kind of worked in a very interesting department for about 10 years now. I guess my role as a psychologist in government was all about creating stability and keeping stability for my kids, for my two boys. So really well suited to that. But once my two boys are now, my sons are 24 and 20. Once they're on their feet and doing really well in their careers, I've kind of stepped out. I bought a home in Geraldton, very settled. So I thought, right, this is the time now. 2 years in, I run my own company. And I guess what I really focus on now, working from home, is supporting adults in their employment. So a lot of EAP work, which is what's called, and
Yeah.
supervision. So
Mm.
supervision to Aboriginal people working in the same industry as me, supervising other psychologists as well. So I kind of find myself landing in really now trying to help Aboriginal people maintain their professional work of choice, which is, a lot of people can be working as counsellors, a lot of people are just working in mining, things like that, and I'm on the other end being their support and or supervisor to support them with all of the issues that I think burden Aboriginal people in workplaces at times, like the load that impacts on them just because they are one or two Aboriginal people within that space.
Mm. Mm. Yes, you
Mm,
use the word stability there for yourself and how
mm,
important that has been along your journey, but trying to sort of bring that to others as well by the sounds of it. And it's such an important
mm,
kind of concept, really, when I think about it, just that notion of kind of stability and security and safeness and also not being overly burdened as the one or two people that sort of kind of
mm.
gets all gets all the jobs to do that, 'cause
Yeah,
it's hard, that piece of it, I think, as well.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. What would you say are sort of are there kind of historical or intergenerational factors that really still play a part there for people and their social and emotional well-being or their workplace well-being and so on? How do you
yeah,
conceptualize that?
yeah. Look, I kind of, there's a couple of things that I always consider when I'm working with families and communities, and that is, who's this person and what has happened to them. So the intergenerational impacts of the past history of our country is it's still impacting on our families now in
Mm,
terms of the stories that our future generations inherit, the mistrust in agencies that our future generations and our current generations have inherited have come from those policies that initially tried to break down our families, and they still are doing that to some extent. It is actually a very, very hurtful kind of impact that occurs because a lot of our families and communities and older generations can't invest and trust the very services that say they're providing these needs, because they're not addressing what the truth is. And we talk about truth telling, and this is still a very new process that people are really hearing the raw truth from things that have happened in the past, and it's hard to hear, but it is that it is the truth, and I
mm,
encourage people to talk about that, but look after themselves along the way as well.
mm. This particular channel and podcast is very interested in compassion, obviously,
Mm,
and I
mm,
think it really bears thinking about because the agencies, as you say, like they sort of say, trust us, we're here to help, and that sort of thing,
mm,
and historically they may have even said, we're doing this from a compassionate motivation, but it seems
mm,
to me it's an example of where compassion is tricky actually, and sometimes
mm,
unskillful or unwise compassion, even if it's coming from a good place, which it might not always be,
mm.
but can actually cause harm, so to speak.
Yeah,
Do you have any thoughts
yeah.
there about that dilemma?
Look, I think one of the things that I've learned in my practice and just the reality even as a parent is that I don't think a lot of people are listening to the stories and of what people are talking about and what their truth is.
Mm,
And they're not listening deeply enough. They're not listening to what really is and what has really happened to
mm,
families. And if they did, that would support them to reframe and change the way they conduct their business, because that's what essentially we want.
mm,
Um, if you deeply listen to an Aboriginal person telling their story, you don't need to do much more than that. You then
mm,
go, aha, I understand.
mm,
But
mm,
this hasn't happened. This hasn't happened for a long time. And so, um, really deep listening is what is required, because then you can truly understand what it was like or what had happened or what it's like to be in the shoes of that person. Until that happens, I don't know what the answer is, but that's the one thing that I've been taught. I've been taught it from psychology yet, but I've been taught it from my upbringing of my mum, to listen
mm,
and kind of reflect on, someone doesn't just wake up and be aggressive. Someone just doesn't turn up and want to do all these maladaptive things. There's a reason, there's something underpinning that.
mm.
And to try and access that, you've got to allow someone to tell their story.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm.
Yes, there's a real danger in thinking that we know what's best for someone, and I
Yeah.
think that's where we've made the mistakes in a way. We have decided that we know what's best and we kind of put it into practice and so on. And but we
Mm.
also, but like I take an approach called compassion focused therapy, which is
Mhm.
sort of all about trying to, kind of really deeply understand what compassion is and so on. And exactly like you said, that some of the competencies of compassion are about things like empathy and understanding and
Mm. Mm.
non-judgment and care and sensitivity to suffering and all of those kinds of things. And the way in there is about listening well, isn't it, as you say? And
Yeah.
listening well helps us to properly understand, so that if we do try to be helpful, we actually are successful at it. Um, but secondly, the listening well is compassion itself. That itself is something that
Yeah.
can be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. It kind of flips some counselling psychology dynamics on its head, because it means, no, we don't fill any spaces. We just sit and we listen as the psychologist. That is therapeutic for an
Yeah.
Aboriginal person to have their story heard,
Mm,
because for a lot of Aboriginal people, they were taught to act.
exactly.
They weren't listened to.
Yes. Talked at and not
Yeah.
listened to. Yeah.
Yeah.
What are some of the like? Can you give us like as a non-Aboriginal person, what do I need to consider as a listener? Are there sort of little kind of ideas there that are helpful in terms of how one might listen well, in that
Mm.
context?
Mm. Yeah, look, I think I go back to like the well-being framework that sits and translates well for Aboriginal people's social and emotional well-being framework, that talks about all of the things where an Aboriginal person is in the middle of a huge interconnected, interrelated network that doesn't just include the person sitting in front of you, but their family, their community, their country, and the country talking about their association and affiliation with the land where they're traditionally from. So, all of those interconnectedness and things are really good opportunities to know so much more about that person sitting in front of you, for more than the problem that they're presenting with. So,
Mm,
for me, I might get a referral about this person and what's happening, but I want to know who they are, where they come from,
mm,
and who their family is. So we are relational people, Aboriginal people. So when you truly understand who a person is and what they're connected to and what they love and what they can't get enough of, it, like they can't get back home for whatever reasons they're working and things like that, you can actually truly understand what it is they need for the problems they're presenting with. So
mm.
this is where, Indigenous psychology is quite a different concept,
Yes.
where we're actually looking to the very things that keep us really strong. If we can't access them, they sometimes flip pretty quickly to becoming a risk factor. So a protective factor can flip to be a risk factor, like the need and the yearning that someone has to go home to country. That's only well understood by Aboriginal people themselves. It's a
Mm.
feeling you get because our connection is to land. So when they can't do that, they start to feel that it's actually disrupting their social emotional well-being. So
Mm.
that's also the very thing that they might be able to facilitate. And you'd be talking about that in a therapeutic sense. So how can you do that? What can you do if you can't go home? How can you get the sense that you are back home? What can you hear? What's a reminder of something that is self-soothing for you about being home on country? So some of the concepts that we learn in psychology, you can actually utilize them with your Aboriginal clients, but you're actually seeing them for who they are and where they come from and what they
Mm.
love, which is everything about their community, all that interconnectedness between culture, community, family, kinship, all of that kind of works around the person in the middle.
Mm. That a person's identity really goes beyond the self in that sense, and
Totally.
to sort of
Yeah.
family, community,
Yep.
land, traditions, all of that.
Yep.
And I suspect we have made a bit of a mistake in psychology there. We are much more prone to just thinking about the individual and the
Mm.
sort of some of the internal thoughts and feelings and physiology, and
Mm.
we've sort of really big on all of that,
Yep.
sort of missing those broader
Yep.
contextual cultural factors, and it's
Yeah.
to the disservice
Yep.
really of the person
Yep.
we might be
Yep.
trying to help.
So I think that one of the main things that I'm very aware of is for a long time in the past, Aboriginal people's presentations have been pathologised quite a lot. So actually listening, so that deep listening about what is this person presenting with, trying to work that out um, without just looking at a mainstream way of looking at it, like a clinical way. So one size doesn't fit all. That's something I continually say. So
Okay.
yes, we are trained in this way, but how about we look at this person from the perspective of who they are, what happened to them, and what do they need? So there is a big history for Aboriginal people about attaching diagnosis to them and pathologising everything they say, which could have been a spiritual concept. It could have been lots of different things, but they weren't considered before. We now have a social and emotional wellbeing framework that supports practitioners to contextualise these presentations, to
Mm.
understand a little bit more about where is this thought coming from? Is this, you know, a clinical issue, or is it something to do with them needing to go home and connect to country? Like, what is this, or is it all of that together? So I
Mm.
think historically, there's been a lot of labels put on Aboriginal people presenting, and therefore there's also a reluctance to utilise mainstream mental health services for that reason. So a lot of mistrust again.
Mm. Yes,
Yeah.
there's sort of listening well involves humility and curiosity, I guess, in a way, a sort of a combo there of some sort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, Being able
Yeah.
to really think curiously, what might this mean for this person and in their life and their community and so on, and not getting too quick to the assumptions and the answers, but staying open, staying curious, staying humble,
Yeah.
listening, and that sort
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah.
If I'm not sure if this is a sort of a sort of an easy question to answer, or even a reasonable question, but would there be sort of literally example questions that you might kind of begin a conversation with, in if you were sort of maybe
Yeah.
meeting someone new and
I mean, I think, one of the main things that I always try to preface my work with Aboriginal families is really who is this person, and, who's their family, looking at that link and what's happened to them. So allowing them, inviting them in to tell a story. I think what a lot of non-Aboriginal practitioners try to do too much of is relate, though. But what Aboriginal people are great humorously. They are great. So stating the obvious differences is really important, and it's empowering for the Aboriginal person sitting with you. So being like a naive inquirer, saying, "Look, I don't know too much about anything. I've actually never worked with an Aboriginal person." Being open about that. So this is
Mm,
where you then you're actually demonstrating some of your vulnerabilities, and that's a very different concept of working with someone. It's usually us in the position of, hang on, I know all this stuff, but actually, it's actually being about being open to say, I don't know so much about
mm,
how your family works and what happens. Tell me all about what your life has been like. So
mm,
it's a complete different dynamic, and so being honest and open about what you don't know.
mm,
So that's about the true, genuine engagement concept. So engagement. So um, being really true to the core about what you don't know. And so I talk to most of my provisional psychologists about, if you don't know, you don't know. What would be the worst thing that could happen if one of your clients, you said that, and what would they come back with? So they'll probably laugh and they'll probably relax a bit more. And I'll say, well, there you go.
mm. Yes,
So it
in
just
some
sets a
ways,
nice tone.
in some
Yeah,
ways, that's the worst that can happen, isn't it? In a way,
that's
it's just
right.
that it's kind of, yeah. There's sort of I'm picking up on other qualities, the sort of the genuineness, the openness, and the vulnerability, and
Yeah.
that's hard for sort of a lot of us health practitioners in a way, isn't it? Because we like
Mm,
the feeling of knowing something and knowing what to
mm,
do, and we have
yeah.
a help, but we really want to be helpful, and but sometimes when we have that kind of vulnerability of not really knowing, it can be hard, I
Mm,
guess, and
mm,
difficult. But having the
yeah.
courage to be vulnerable, I suppose, is so important.
Mm. I think I preface, because there's been a history of Aboriginal people being asked a lot of questions and the information, they don't know where that's going. Very open that, listen, I ask a lot of questions. I'm a bit of a humbug because I need to know a lot about you to be able to help. And so my questions come from a good place, and it's always a place where you can come back to and say, Shannon, what are you asking that question for? And
Mm,
tell me, pull me up when you want to pull me up. Let me know all about that.
mm,
So very open and genuine about understanding that in the past, even though I'm an Aboriginal person, if I continually ask a lot of questions, there's a lot of suspiciousness about that. And that goes back to policies and things that have happened in the past where a lot of Aboriginal people have presented and a lot of things have been asked of them, and it's eventuated to nothing but hurt.
mm,
So, prefacing my conversation all the time, look, I just need to know lots and lots of things. So I'm going to ask lots of questions. Tell me when I'm being a humbug, and tell me when you've had enough of all the questions with Shannon. Let me know
mm,
all about it. So I'm
mm,
very open about putting limitations on how much someone can tolerate in a session and not.
mm. Um, yes, and I was thinking a moment ago that well, just as you were saying that, I bet there are certain questions that we've been taught to ask or whatever that are actually also not needing to be asked. That there may even be some things that we as practitioners can just set aside. Because we have so
Mm,
many kind of questions there that often, I don't know, it's more about we want to know that rather than it necessarily actually being a part of being helpful. So I imagine
yeah,
we can set aside certain things. We can take an approach that really is focused on engagement first and foremost, but then be open about the fact that perhaps there are a couple of things I'd really like to know and ask more
yep,
directly. And so bear with me. And if it feels uncomfortable, yeah, just let me know or ask me what the point is, and those sorts of things. What about other core listening skills like reflections or paraphrases, or how are there any tips there about how they? I'm getting to the nitty gritty a little bit with that question, but yeah, what are
yeah.
your thoughts there?
Yeah, look, I think I come from a place of, when I reflect things back, I preface most of the things that I work with in my sessions with, tell me if I've got this right, or tell me if this is what I've understood. So it's a very it's not a new counselling dynamic, but it allows the person to still have some ownership on that story if it's truly been understood. So
Hmm.
pull me up if I've got this wrong. Let me know. So still inviting them in that process and reflecting it back to them, and then letting them take that over or run over it. Tell me what you've understood from today, and allowing them to
Mm.
retell that story.
Mm. Mm. Yes,
Mm.
there's a bit of a danger that a person who perhaps comes from a history of being told what to do, or people coming in and all of the stuff you were saying before, that
Mm.
they might hear a reflection and then kind of just nod or whatever, and but sort of not necessarily engage with it. So the sense there from you is that just really giving the person permission to clarify or to correct,
Yep.
or that
Yep.
I just tell me if I've got this about right, or
Yep.
and sort of really kind of um, inviting them and kind of empowering them in that conversation to be able to sort of correct us and
Yep.
make sure that we've got it right.
Yep.
What about affirmations? This is the last sort of, I guess, kind of technical question about listening skills, but because I come from a bit of a tradition of motivational interviewing and using open
Yep.
questions, reflections, and affirmations as some of the core listening skills. And of course, affirmations are where you might, yeah, just sort of speak to the strengths or the qualities, or put
Yep.
into words, things that you're
Yep.
noticing in amongst what they're saying. How would you say that kind of fits in,
Yeah. Look,
culturally?
I think we are. It's essential to work from a strength base with our families. There's always something that you can find in any of your clients that actually, provides them a bit of a top up, that they come in and they go out feeling okay. Like I genuinely engage with them and say things and interact like I actually do and would worry if you're okay or not.
Hmm.
So I'm working really hard, first of all, to have the engagement that I need to be able to get the reflection back from my clients. So um, I guess, sometimes finding the strengths that are happening in Aboriginal families is hard when there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of suffering, there's a lot of health related issues. But even just your interaction, that someone was open enough to attend and listen and feel comfortable in your space, is a good enough strength to look for. So, the onus is back on you as a practitioner to always try and find that opportunity to reflect back that you've even seen in your client for that session, that they've come and attended, even with all this chaos going on in their life.
Hmm.
So that's been true to the word of strength based, and even them just tolerating us asking so many questions in a very formal or uncomfortable space for them.
There's strengths around even turning up, for this session, let alone turning up next time as well. Or there's strengths around the motivations behind that. Perhaps it is
Yep,
about family and a bit like you described
yep,
earlier on, or
yep,
the certain values there that one might affirm, or even in the face of all of that adversity, the resilience or persistence or perseverance or strength and inner strength
mm,
and courage that really is behind the fact that they are able to keep going, seems to be really important. So just to sort of change tack a little bit from the more
mhm.
specific skills and perhaps the broader concept of compassion, and whether there are cultural nuances around. I mean, is that a word that one might refer to and think about? Are there certain ways that people in community kind of might consider compassion and what it is and so on, let alone, concepts like self-compassion and where self-compassion might in fact fit in around all of that. Any thoughts with all of those bits?
Yeah, look, I would say that Aboriginal people are very compassionate people. So, amongst all of the things that are going on in their life, they're very respectful about processes and things that occur. For example, grief. It's
Hmm.
a very important opportunity to show your respect for the passing of a loved one. And that's something that's not negotiable. That's something that has to occur. So that happens time and time again, and so often. And yet, the respect protocols that occur when someone passes away
Mm.
is always considered and followed.
So the compassion for others, for example. I mean, if we think about that flow first, you give that the example of grief and loss, and the way that not only is compassion just sort of built in there, but in actual fact there are kind of almost like, was it protocols almost that you sort of mentioned, or sort of respect that comes in
Mm,
there, and
mm,
there's sort of it's a really important part culturally in how we respond and care for others, especially in times of grief and loss.
yeah. Yeah, and I look, this probably comes back to just parenting 101, but one of the things that I really speak quite strongly to my two sons about, because they walk in the world of mining and
Mm,
everything that happens to young men, that when you see someone's behaviour and it's whatever it is, really consider in that moment, not reacting to that, but considering what has actually happened for that person.
mm,
People don't just wake up and are aggressive. They don't just wake up and want to be racist. So really ground yourself in the moment and consider what's occurring, but that there's something else there underpinning that. So don't react, just respond if you
mm,
need to. And I think, when I see all the issues in the community and the hurt that's occurred and still occurring in family and domestic violence, one of the main core critical points is supporting your children to understand what's going on out there and how do they navigate that world.
mm,
Um,
mm,
and especially when they're very highly toxic and difficult situations where it could go either way. But just, the most important job in the world, I believe, even if I look at my career, is still being a mum.
mhm,
Still being able to impart information from my experience to support my sons to develop a worldview that they need to consider what's going on for a person before they react to that.
mm.
I believe that's true to compassion.
Yes.
Um, and I've certainly seen many examples of it, and I have a lot of observations about how my sons are in the world. And so for me, it's not my career that's the benchmark. It's actually raising two boys to be really good people.
Mm,
For me, that's the benchmark for me.
mm. Yes, that really speaks to the aspect of compassion, which is kind of awareness and understanding of just how tricky it is to be a human being. That we first of all
Yeah,
have these tricky brains that we're born with, and then we have a whole range of experiences that go on to shape
yeah,
us, and even someone who is being very difficult, or aggression, as you said, and that sort of stuff. They were a child once too, sort of a thing, and
yeah,
we can sort of stay connected to the whole person, and the
yeah,
life journey they've been on,
yeah.
not to then let them off the hook necessarily, or let them
No,
continue
no,
the behavior, but
yeah,
but to do it in a responsive way, not so reactive way,
yeah,
and
and
respond in a way
respect.
that's helpful,
Yeah, and respectful, right? So this is the
respectful.
story that I tell my two sons. I said, when I was a police officer, I was a minority. I was the only female, but I still had to do the work of what the men were doing. So
Mm,
I did a lot of talking to people about what I wanted them to do. I didn't want to put my hands on people. So I would say things very simply. Hey, would you just be able to get in the back of this van and then we can all go and then no one has to see a big drama?
mm,
Okay.
mm,
Very different approach to someone else I might have been working with hands on, aggression, pressure.
mm,
So I learned from an early age if you want people to listen to you, you have to genuinely engage with them in that moment, regardless of how they're behaving.
Mm. Mm.
Mate, can you just get in the back of the van? Because then your mates won't see you being put in the back of a van by a woman. Oh,
Mm.
yep, yep, I will. Yep, cool.
Yes. There's a
Easy. Better for everyone.
yes, a
So,
good logic there. And actually, it speaks to the idea that when people are behaving in more aggressive ways, it's because their threat system is activated, And so
that's right.
if we go in hands on and so on, that just activates things even further,
Yep,
and
yep,
everyone becomes a bit threat system activated. But as you
yep.
say, yes, if you can sort of help to just even a little bit kind of down regulate that, then things go a bit easier.
Yep.
What about the self-compassion piece? How does that, 'cause especially given that kind of community sense and that any given individual feels a part of something bigger and so on. So self-compassion.
Look, I think the sense of community for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families is huge. It's never really seen. You really only typify what happens in a community based on, bad media reports. But I certainly have never left working in any of my clinics in community-based settings without any feelings of absolute overwhelming sense that there's a contribution happening there because the sense of community is a feeling. It is an opportunity um, to be, do, think, um, absorb everything to do with that place that you work and the place that you love just by turning up, just by being a part of it. You actually don't need to do any of that. But I
Mm,
think one of the things that we don't do enough of is supporting each other and telling each other when we're doing a really good job.
mm,
Um, and that can come off sometimes the wrong way for some Aboriginal family. And, I guess there's kind of a respect system in Aboriginal families that, respect is earned, it's not expected. And so that means being true to your word and true to your roles that you have all of the time, not just 9 to 5. So being a community member that wants to support, um, genuinely address issues, have the hard conversations, not allow things to occur, speaking up for those vulnerable within a space. So, I kind of get a sense that self compassion for me is still about lots to do with my community.
mm,
And I still never really exist on my own. I exist within a huge network of people and family, but um, we must look after ourselves and we must, respect ourselves to be able to
mm,
be respected people, if that makes sense. So,
mm,
um,
mm,
but there is a lot of pressure on people in positions. There's a lot of pressure in our roles, like in my role. So, for example, I love nothing more than spending time at home in a nice quiet house and gardening and very, very quiet activities because the work that we do, 9 to 5, is very high volume and very, emotionally taxing at times. And like I say to a lot of the clients that I work with, I really do wonder and care and worry about them. So I have to engage in looking after myself to be able to come back to the table and to do that 45 minutes or 60 minutes of work with you and be reset and be um, very focused as well. So
mm,
uh, I think it's a hard journey. Self compassion is a hard journey,
mm.
but if you can arrive at a place where, oh gosh, I've got my supervisor ready to jump on and do supervision. It's 10 minutes too. Yeah, I think self compassion is about kind of really understanding what it is that you do, what you represent. But for me, I'm a part of a bigger picture and a bigger community sense of community. That keeps me strong individually, though.
I think
Mm,
stands out for me there is just compassion as flow. It flows
Mm,
in
mm,
multiple ways, multiple directions, and if we get too caught up on an individualistic version of self-compassion, then we're sort of missing the point a little bit, I think. You're really making
definitely.
that point that self-compassion is still intricately sort of woven into community and land and country and so on, and it's kind of silly to even try to extract that out of there.
Mm,
Like a
mm,
self-compassionate action might be really about engaging with community in a sense, that's it's all kind of woven together. So I really,
yep.
yeah, I really do. That's a lot of food for thought. It's the unconscious lenses that non-Aboriginal people might put onto things that misses the point, and this is a really great example. I'm going to go and contemplate this a
Hmm.
lot more, that self-compassion can be many, many things actually, and we need to be careful there not to kind of get too blinkered on sort of
Mm,
what it might be about.
yeah. Yep. Totally agree.
So I will let you go in a moment into
Yep.
your busy day and so on. But I suppose just as a last little question, I mean, it sort of goes from what I was just saying. But like, what would you say, or wish to share, I guess, with non-Indigenous Australians in
Mm,
terms of, especially those who might want to be, sort of allies and better support and so on for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities.
mm,
Like, what's a message there, or something in the approach that you feel would be
mm,
really worth
mm.
us thinking about?
Yeah. Yeah, look, I think my approach still is like listen and listen
Mm,
really deeply to what the conversation is. Um, Aboriginal people have a story, everyone has a story, and that story is always related to historical things that have occurred in the past that they've inherited for whatever reason that's
mm,
occurred, and it can't be understood unless they get the opportunity to tell their story. Who are they and what's happened?
mm,
You know, who are they when you've got one person sitting across from you? That is, who's this person? Who's their family? Where are they from? What's happened to them? But we're not guiding their story, we're allowing them to tell their story. That comes with the engagement
mm,
and rapport and trust. So you've got a lot of work to do because you're
mm,
actually inheriting all of the ways that Aboriginal people have been interacted with by mainstream services before, and that hasn't been done well.
mm,
Not at all, but also one size doesn't fit all. There is no one way to work with another Aboriginal person, but bring the uniqueness of what you don't know to the table. Say, look, I don't know
mm,
anything about what life's like for you. All I know is da da da. Being truthful and honest about what you don't know. That kind of allows a little bit more openness and a tendency to allow someone to tell them a story. So I
yeah.
just think it's different to the concepts of what we're taught in clinical training is counselling means someone says something, then you say something, then they say something.
Mm,
No, we need to do less of the talking as practitioners now. And we need
mm,
to listen. If we can listen, we can truly hear the story and reflect that back quite genuinely. Not the story that fits with us for 60 minutes, but exactly what's happened to that person and the family that's been the generation before. So
yeah, no,
that's my
wonderful. Yeah, perfect. It's sort of who are they and what's happened, and those two bits are actually big questions. They're sort of really comprehensive sorts of giving attention to all of who they are and all that's happened. Including
mm,
historically and across the generations. And I loved what you said, the little little catchphrase, the uniqueness of what you don't know. I think that, yeah, that's really
Mm.
fabulous. That it's a really sort of inspiring to approach it all in with that kind of a mindset. So, well, Shannon McNear, thank you very much. Well, firstly, for all the amazing work that you're doing and the inspiration that you are for sort of people that are coming along behind, I really appreciate all of that. But also, thank you for coming and speaking with me on Compassion in a T-shirt.
Thank you, Dr. Stan.
Wonderful.